Hello everyone, I'm Brian Dragon, and welcome to another Truth or Scare commentary. Today is the Curse of Tutankhamen, and it looks like Alex is joining us. Let's get started.
Few modern people fear the power of ancient curses and hexes, but there are others who believe a deadly curse has been released on the world as recently as the 1920s. A curse that could make even skeptics think twice. An ancient tomb holds a huge treasure. An unbelievable wealth allegedly protected by an unknown evil. One by one, many of those who have disturbed the crypt have died mysteriously. Could it be a deadly hex? This is the story of the Curse of Tutankhamen.
This was another I saw during midday. It was about lunchtime, and I was actually quite interested in this one because it, in contrast to Wolfman, it wasn't exactly. It wasn't heavy. At least to me.
On the banks of the Nile, the body of a boy king lies dead, wrapped in cloth and mysteriously sealed underground. Boy? An Egyptian pharaoh entombed with a priceless fortune some 3,000 years ago. 1,500 years before the birth of Christ, kings of Egypt known as pharaohs were buried in the Valley of the Kings, a land riddled with age-old mysteries that continue to fascinate us to this day. This is the Valley of Death. Chiseled out of the rock
The
is
Valley
the
of the
greatest
Kings.
mausoleum. The old saying goes, you can't take it with you. But the kings of ancient Egypt certainly tried to find a way. Each king was buried with priceless treasures of ivory, ebony, and gold. But each tomb was hidden under thousands of years of sandstorms and erosion.
Because pyramids were basically billboards that said, "We've buried the kings and their treasure here."
But before the 1920s, they believed that it had
That's
already
the
been
reason why they
tainted by
switched to the
centuries
Valley
of
of the
thieves
Kings.
and collectors. But they were wrong. At 9 years old, he took the throne and a wife. By the age of 18, he was dead.
He was only a bit younger than 9.
3,000 years later, only a handful of people knew the name, Tutankhamen. One was an unknown archaeologist named Howard Carter. Another, his financial backer, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, George Edward Stanhope Herbert. A little-known digger and a wealthy English lord were an odd couple to pursue ancient riches.
I seriously want to know what documentary list
which
documentary list
Carter
reformatted.
carefully and methodically plotted out the Valley of the Kings, inch by inch, and set out to excavate. But he found only disappointment. So, in December of 1921, Carnarvon summoned Carter to Highclere Castle. He told Mr. Carter that he could no longer afford to pay for this useless digging in the far-off deserts of Egypt. But Carter begged Carnarvon to pay for just a few more months of excavating. He agreed, but made it clear this would be the last trip. On the third day of the final dig, workers uncovered stone steps leading to a hidden doorway stamped with an ancient seal. It was the mark of royalty. Carter sent for Lord Carnarvon right away. On the evening of November 26, 1922, they opened the tomb of King Tut, and according to legend, released the mummy's curse. An English lord and his daughter, along with an archaeologist and his assistant, stood on the threshold of the richest find in history. Carter peered into the gloom on the other side of the wall for what seemed like an eternity. At last, Carnarvon whispered, "Can you see anything?" "Yes," Carter replied.
Wonderful
"Wonderful
things.
things."
There's never been a pharaoh found in any way almost intact. We're talking about things that you look at now. You cannot believe that these are the thousands of years old that they are.
Considering
It's
the
awesome.
state Akhenaten's mummy is in.
The smallest explorer, Lady Evelyn Herbert, daughter of Lord Carnarvon, led the way inside. 3 men, 1 woman, and somewhere, a dead king.
At least the mummy we believe to be his.
You're in there.
Mainstream
First person in 1,000 years to be
archaeologists
inside,
believe it to be
person
his.
died. There must have been a little of the old haunting, the hauntedness that comes with that.
The tomb of the boy king was the richest ever found. Overnight, Carnarvon, Carter, and Tutankhamen became celebrities.
They felt, just total triumph, victory. And they'd been laughed at, they'd been mocked. It'd been kind of a whispering campaign and they lost their marbles, And here they have it.
They
But
found
Lord
it.
Carnarvon would have precious little time to enjoy his newfound fame and fortune.
Then came the mosquito.
One morning in the spring of 1923, Lord Carnarvon cut himself, exactly where a mosquito bit him days before. The wound wouldn't heal. Carnarvon was racked with fever. As fever turned to chills, Carnarvon's wife summoned a specialist to Cairo. But Carnarvon was beyond help. And at the very moment that he died, all the lights suddenly went out in Cairo. Carnarvon's body was barely cold when the world's press named the culprit. Inscribed within the tomb, wrote one reporter, was a curse that warned, "I will kill all those who cross this threshold." Another paper reported, "They who enter this sacred tomb shall swift be visited by wings of death." For Carnarvon, death indeed came on wings, the wings of a mosquito. So began the legend of the mummy's curse. Some say that supposedly it continues even today, but scientists aren't so sure. Come along as we investigate the source of the mummy's curse. Which with their scare returns.
Tutankhamen was both son and nephew to
Was there really a deadly spell
Akhenaten.
cast thousands of years ago on the tomb of Tutankhamen?
Tutankhamun's mother, the individual we know as
Many
the younger
victims.
lady, was actually
Skeptics wonder if there
Akhenaten's
is some truth
sister.
to the lethal hex.
And thus that made
1922,
Tutankhamun's wife,
Carter shrugged off the
Ankhesenamen, both
curse and
cousin
went
and
back to work.
half-sister to him.
Perhaps easier said than done. Almost immediately, wealthy travelers, fascinated by Tut's treasures and unafraid of his curse, descended on his tomb. One of the few allowed inside was the railroad tycoon George J. Gould, guided by Carter himself. For his private tour, Gould paid a heavy price. That night, he came down with a fever. The next day, he died. Around the same time, a British industrialist suffered the same fate. But were they really victims of a curse? Or was there a more logical reason behind their deaths?
I received a call from a physician, and he told me this very interesting and very unfortunate story about a woman who had gone with her husband to Egypt and had gone into the tomb of King Tut, and it turned out that she had picked up a fungus.
That woman was Cheryl Munson, a part-time art student and housewife. Cheryl died shortly after visiting the tomb in 1995. The cause, apparently, was exposure to a fungus called Aspergillus niger.
So what we had to find out was whether these molds were also present in the tombs that she visited. And so we called the Egyptology department at the University of Pennsylvania.
So they were wondering if this had anything to do with the curse.
That's a pretty cool looking room.
It had. In 1923, 2 men died suddenly after visiting Tut's tomb. What doctors chalked up to a fever was reported as Tut's curse. 2 more sudden deaths followed. Pecky Callender, who helped Carter break into the tomb, and Arthur Mace, who helped to remove its contents. Possibly, the true killer lurked on the very walls of the tomb. To Howard Carter, it looked like chipped paint until he looked closer. Then he realized it was some sort of fungus.
I think by connecting our case, which is a modern-day case, to the visit and the tombs itself, we were able to have a direct link to what might have happened to the archaeologist who had visited some time ago. And I am rather confident that in at least some of these cases, that Aspergillus could have easily played a role.
This is really such a well-preserved mask. You can see these copper eyelashes around the stone eyes here.
Dr. Rosalie David is the Queen of Mummies, a curator for Egyptology for England's Manchester University Museum. She's examined 35 mummies, more than anyone else.
Working with a mummy can be hazardous, both for the operator and for the mummy, because the operator could breathe in spores from the mummy dust, and in reverse, the operator could deposit bacteria or moisture onto the surface of the mummy, thus causing decomposition.
Though dead for thousands of years, a mummy is alive with germs and bacteria, some harmless, some deadly.
We wear protective clothing when we work with the mummies, and this protects us against the fungal spores.
Rosalie David believes she knows the true fate of those who disturb the bones of Tutankhamen. Their crude autopsy freed an invisible killer. In the old days, the operators didn't wear protective clothing. They could have unknowingly unleashed airborne toxins when the tomb was opened.
Sounds likely.
If a little fungus caused all this destruction, why are the ancestors of Lord Carnarvon still filled with a case of the jitters? Find out when we return to Truth or Scare. Since the burial of King Tut, the so-called Curse of the Mummy has traveled across the centuries. By 1929, 13 people were dead.
I'd say decades.
Anything remotely connected with the tomb of Tutankhamen seems to have left death and destruction in its path. The man who found Tut's tomb, Howard Carter, was among the few to escape its curse. Almost.
His good friend Carnarvon is dead. He is under huge pressure from the Egyptians. He's under enormous pressure from the press that didn't get the story. He has a tiny little space to work in. He's going crazy. Howard Carter just gets to the point where he can't take it any longer. And he cracked. He did this rash act of putting this enormous iron gate and locking it. It was the English takeover of something that the people of Egypt owned, which was true. And they went crazy, and they threw him out.
After a year's suspension, Howard Carter was allowed back to the tomb, but he was forced to forever surrender his claim to Tut's treasure. So he spent the rest of his life cataloging Tut's priceless treasures, the treasures that he found but could never own. Perhaps his was the worst curse of all.
But at the same
Henry
time,
Carter hoped to put an end to the so-called mummy's curse. Before his death in 1939,
wasn't the locking
he
of the
arranged
tomb
for the
something
then
that
king's remains to be
prevented
returned
the
to his tomb,
possible theft of the
but Tut
artifacts?
wouldn't rest in peace. In a
Strange to
chain
think about
reaction
it
of
that
tragedy,
way.
his curse claimed 5 more victims in quick succession. First, Lady Carnarvon died suddenly and strangely of an insect bite, just like her husband. Then, Richard Beetel, Lord Carnarvon's secretary, died mysteriously in his sleep, with no explanation. 3 months later, Beetel's father, Lord Westbury, leapt from a 7th floor window to his death. He left a note blaming his son's death on the curse of King Tut.
I remember thinking that was actually
On the
that
way to
spike
the
was where he
cemetery, Lord
landed.
Westbury's hearse struck an 8-year-old boy. At the exact moment the boy died, so did an Egyptologist at the British Museum. Next, the treasures of Tutankhamen go on tour and the so-called curse invades the modern world.
Okay, if the tomb had remained locked, artifacts wouldn't go on tour and this curse spreading nonsense wouldn't have happened.
Tutankhamen was buried with 5,000 priceless belongings. His royal treasures were meant to join him on his journey to the afterlife. Instead, they took a detour. A deadly detour. In the 1970s, Egypt bowed to popular demand and sent scores of Tut's relics on a world tour. Among the sightseers, when the treasure reached London, was the first person to enter Tut's tomb, Lady Evelyn Herbert.
My mother had never seen the final sarcophagus because they hadn't reached that particular chamber before her father died. At the time of the exhibition in London, the television and radio,
As you can see, it's been the
say,
video's been cropped a
tell
bit,
us about the curse, and she'd laugh
leaving
and say,
some
well, I'm alive and
leaving a
kicking
bit
at
cut
70,
off at the bottom.
and I don't believe in it. And coming out of the museum, probably on her 5th visit, she had a major stroke and was paralyzed from then on. But of course, it could easily have been a coincidence.
Some say these incidents were not caused by an evil hex at all. Dr. David Silverman, a renowned Egyptologist, sought out another logical origin of Tut's curse.
In any of the inscriptions that occur in the tomb, there are none that can be considered a curse. So what we would consider, or as an Egyptologist, I would consider an ancient Egyptian curse does not occur in the tomb of King Tut.
It appears that the mummy's curse was accidentally created by its first victim. When Lord Carnarvon gave exclusive coverage of Tut's tomb to the London Times, rival papers were furious. At Carnarvon's death, they got even by printing rumors of a curse. Even the weird events when Carnarvon died.
There's Eye on the right there, Tutankhamun's successor and possibly grandfather of Tutankhamen, maternal grandfather anyway. Nefertiti was not a daughter of Amenhotep III.
Outrageous series of half-truths and some truth and some lies, some made up.
The son of Lord Carnarvon talked about how he doesn't really believe in the curse, but he said there really isn't any way to explain a lot of what went on. And that has kept the curse alive. No matter how you try to kill it, it's like a phoenix, it resurfaces over and over again. But then again, no matter how much we hear that there isn't a Loch Ness monster or that there aren't any UFOs through logical means, we still believe in them, don't we?
It's marvelous human
Yes, I
nature.
suppose
We love
so.
this sort of stuff. We love it. Even if I know it's all made up, I love it. I love the Tut curse.
Yes, I suppose I do as
The
well.
treasure of Tutankhamen now makes its home in the Cairo Museum, where untold numbers have gazed upon it in wonder. But the mummy itself once again rests in its ancient home in the Valley of the Kings. Once the least known pharaoh, he is now the most famous.
One of them anyway. Alongside Ramses the Great, Alexander the Great,
Tutankhamen, now a household
Cleopatra.
name, has what all pharaohs wanted most. He has gained immortality, if only in name. Ironically, this young Egyptian pharaoh owes his fame to the English nobleman who some 3,000 years later disturbed his tomb. This is the same man who is believed to have unleashed a chain reaction of death. But whether it was by exposing the world to a lethal mold or by unlocking an ancient curse, we will always be fascinated with the life and death of the boy king known as Tutankhamen.
Long ago, I was probably 4, maybe 5. And there was on the Discovery Channel. I'm not sure what it was. I think it was probably just a special about going into the tomb of Tutankhamen. I was excited for it. I wanted to watch it, and then I discovered how incredibly creepy night vision can be. That is exactly what happened. Because you see, when it came to the chamber itself with all of those magnificent treasures, it was done via night vision. And let me tell you something, it really started to creep me out, like, oh my god, is this going to be a monster show up? I mean, obviously, that's not something that happened. I mean, I didn't watch the rest of it, I just left the room. But I was legitimately scared. I was 4, maybe 5. That was my introduction to night vision, and also my introduction to Tutankhamen. Everyone knows the name King Tut, but not many really know a lot about him. Let's see here, son and nephew of Akhenaten, as well as son of the younger lady. Of course, considering Akhenaten and the younger lady were both children of Amenhotep III, that would make him also the nephew of the younger lady. Half-brother and cousin of Ankhsenamen. Grandson-in-law of I. Yeah, possibly, but we're not exactly sure if he is or not. Once upon a time, we thought he was murdered. Now we know it was actually a broken leg that turned gangrenous. He couldn't move his neck, because every bone in it was, I should say he couldn't move his head. Every bone in his neck was fused together. So he'd have to turn his entire torso if he had to look around. He had a club foot. But despite his disabilities, what we know about him is that he was a warrior king once he became old enough. We found leather armor in his tomb, and from the looks of it, it definitely saw use. So how exactly did he break his leg? A chariot accident, maybe? On campaign, possibly? I don't know. I really don't know. Tutankhamen fathered 2 daughters. Unfortunately, they were stillborn. Being a product of brother-sister incest and his own wife being his half-sister, it's only natural that those things would happen. After Tutankhamen died, which unfortunately, well, perhaps I should tell you who his appointed heir was. The man we know as Horemheb, last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, was a man of common birth. He rose up to become general of the Egyptian army and was on campaign in Asia when Tutankhamen died. Thus did I take the throne. And you wouldn't believe just how he was able to do so. From what we know, it would appear that Ankh-Senamen did not want to marry someone of common birth, and thus married I. As Grand Vizier, I was already in a high position. A high position indeed, and he got an even higher one when he married his possible granddaughter. To make things a bit more messed up, one of Horemheb's wives was another daughter of I. So I basically stole the throne from his own son-in-law by marrying his possible granddaughter. Yeah. Of course, I was not a young man. How old was he? Yeah, you got me there. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. At any rate, he was not as lucky as Merneptah of the 19th dynasty, who succeeded his father Ramses the Great who died at the age of 90, I should say. Meneptah was 60? Yeah, possibly. I mean, I have some reason to doubt he was in his late 60s or early 70s. Due to his position as being the 13th son, and well, let's just say Ramses didn't exactly follow only sons, so yeah, I'm not too sure about that late 60s, early 70s thing. I mean, he could have been, but still I'm uncertain. In theory, he was probably 60 and ruled for about a decade. In contrast, I think 4 years probably. After which Horemheb took the throne and ruled for about 28 years. Horemheb never saw children. And by that I mean in the mummy of one of his wives, a fetus was found. He never saw children of his own. He died childless. And seeking to avoid a succession crisis, he named his Grand Vizier his successor. A man with children and grandchildren. The man we know as Ramses I. He ruled for 2 years, until finally Seti I, Ramses I's son, took the throne and ruled for 11. And after he died, heart ailment, the belief is, Ramses the Great came to the throne at the age of 24 and ruled for 66 years. He was 11 when Horemheb died. 11. He wasn't born during his father's rule. He was born during the reign of his grandfather's predecessor. And furthermore, he was a redhead. And fair-skinned, surprisingly. Or perhaps not. Egypt has been crossroads and melting pot since time immemorial. And Ramses' family is currently believed to be descended from immigrants. I know this is well off topic of Tutankhamen, but the fact of the matter is, his death was the beginning of the 19th dynasty in a way. It laid the groundwork. He dies, I stay on the throne. Horemheb takes the throne after I dies. And unfortunately, Horemheb has no children. But he has a friend, a vizier, who has children and grandchildren, so it's interesting to think about how the two are connected in more ways than we might want to think. But still, 90. Pretty impressive, Ramses. Some years ago, the artifacts were on display in Toronto. I never got to see them. I hope I can someday. I hope I can. Tutankhamen, Ramses, Cleopatra, Alexander. And the Romans who bear the name of Pharaoh. Most famous of them being Augustus, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. They've achieved what some of us might never. Immortality. True, they are long dead, but we still know the names of them. But is there actually a Curse of Tutankhamen? I don't think so. We know there isn't, but our minds tell us differently. We may know there is no such thing, but at the same time we believe. Why? The mind is a funny thing that way. I'm Brian Croydragon signing out. Stay Shrey.